There you go. Here's doing a webinar in 2021. Thanks for joining us. We are delighted to be here together and talk about getting down to business and achieving equal gender leadership by 2025. And everything that's going to be required to do that. Probably not everything, but to the best of our ability, what we know will be involved in that. I am thrilled and delighted to be here with Shelly Lazarus, one of my heroes. I know a lot of people on here share that feeling. You have told me about it leading up to today. So Shelly, welcome. And thank you for joining this important conversation. And I think you're matching me. You're
happy to be. No, I'm not.
Oh, there you are. No, you're there. You're great.
Yeah. All right. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And Shelly is actually on holiday this week in Georgia. You're talking to two people sitting in Georgia. That's pretty ironic. But thank you for taking time away from your family. It is your granddaughter's 10th birthday today. So happy birthday to her. But thank you for making the time. So Shelly, when we started talking about coming together and having this conversation, you and I chose deliberately to talk about getting down to business because I think we have a shared belief that, you know, there's a lot of conversation about this, but are we really talking about the actions, the things that have to happen, the conditions for success that need to be evident? And so I think you and I both said, let's get down to the real topics around equal gender leadership. That was the first thing. I think also, obviously, it's International Women's Day this week, and so the ability to talk in a time frame where this is topical and important to those who have been, you know, doing a lot of conversation this week and having these same conversations felt important. There has been progress. We want to shine a light on the things that have been successful, and certainly we're going to come onto your career in a minute. It's certainly a very different environment now where you and I can have a conversation like this. And then finally, I mentioned to you, and I'll sort of pre-set up, the absolute adoration for you is something that I have, you know, I felt personally, but putting this in my social media channels and people talking about the impact you have had on them across decades of your career. I mean, it's making me emotional just even referencing it, but I told you up to and including your driver who made a comment that he thought you were absolutely one of the best human beings ever. And I think as you and I were talking, drivers know the truth. So I offer that to you. And again, thank you for joining us.
Well, it's wonderful to be here, Wendy. And I always love talking to you just in general, but you know, I was so happy when I heard that for the first time that you were going to be leading an agency, actually, because you were one of the great clients. I hope everyone knows on this call that Wendy was one of the truly great clients that I ever saw in action. And so to have a client, given that what we do is provide value for clients, is that to have a client then jump to the leadership of an agency was just brilliant. And I think history has proven how correct that was, just as a prediction. But anyway, it's wonderful to be here, and it's, you know, one of the great parts of my career is all the people that I've met along the way, and you know, to me, it's just sort of it's not transactional. These are relationships that I feel that I have for life. It's almost like when someone I've worked with gets a big promotion, it's almost like, hey mom, here's what I did. And I'm as thrilled as their mother is, his or her mother is, I'm sure. But it's the great satisfaction.
Awesome. So I think to guide our discussion today, you and I talked about breaking this down into sort of three component parts of our conversation. The first we want to talk about is the women, the actual leaders and the potential of those leaders, and some of the experiences and lessons learned that we would share as part of, you know, in achieving this gender equal leadership in 2025. So that's one component. The second component obviously is our agencies and agency culture in general. What has to exist? What are those conditions of success? What are the conditions of leadership and the culture that needs to exist in order for these candidates, these really talented people to thrive and succeed and obviously matriculate through our agency. So I want to talk about that. And then, want to end more broadly on the industry in general. I mean, I think we have to observe the industry. I think any of us who've spent the majority of our careers here want this to be a place that is welcoming and inviting of women, where they look in and go, I believe I can chart a really successful career here. That's where I want to place my bets. And so we want to sort of land more broadly on the industry. So in order to do that, Shelly, we're going to start by talking about sort of experiences and lessons. Certainly, hopefully, a lot of women are on this call today, and these are the very people we want to again, thrive and succeed in our agencies. We're going to start with your journey because it's about as rich a context as you can get in terms of being a female leader in our industry. And your story is simply remarkable. Just one of 4 women in your MBA class at Columbia Business School out of a class of 300. I mean, the numbers in and of themselves are just staggering to even say that. Your career began with early client-side experience, but after your MBA, you began this incredible journey with Ogilvy, starting in 1971. You became the CEO by 1996. You were the chairman in 1997, and of course, today, the chairman emeritus. So I think the first question has to be, with so few women, both around you in your curriculum, but obviously in the business environment too, what was inside your head that inspired you to believe you could be successful?
So Wendy, that's a fascinating question, because my whole journey was a bit of an accident. And so, when people come into my office or women come in and they give me the chart of here's where I want to be 5 years out, 10 years out, I went to Columbia Business School because I wanted to get married and I didn't want to type. People don't understand. I think context is really important. So I graduated from an all-women's college in 1968. I graduated from Smith. And if you wanted to work in the commercial world in 1968 and you were a woman, you had to type. And you could choose where you typed. You could type in an insurance company. You could type in an ad agency. You could type anywhere. But anyway, so I was in love. My now husband was in medical school, and someone had to earn a living. So I went out there and said, I need a job. And I was so gobsmacked by the fact that you had to type. And it was always revealed in the last, you'd have an hour interview, like on minute 57, you'd think you were applying for a job to be an executive at a bank. You would discover you were typing. Some HR person must have seen how crestfallen I was and said to me, I'll bet if you got an MBA, they couldn't make you type. Now, by the way, I've never forgotten, it was a hypothesis. It was not a sure thing. So I didn't know what an MBA was, but I found out. And I found out there was one at Columbia where my husband was in medical school. And so that's how I wound up as one of 4 women. But what happened was that I fell in love with marketing and business. And I just found it absolutely fascinating. The fact that the way you positioned a product or a service, the way you interacted with consumers, the consumer insight, and I just found it absolutely fascinating. And then I had my first job. You and I exchanged some emails about who were your great bosses. Well, my first job was, I was the first woman who worked professionally in the Maxwell House division of General Foods, which is now Kraft. And there were all these moments, you do these conversations and you call up these moments. I mean, they hired me, and I was told afterwards that the group product manager on Maxwell House walked into the boss's office, the head of the division, and said, I understand you hired a woman, but she certainly can't work for me. And the boss said, why? And he said, what would I do if I criticized her and she cried? Now, this was 1971. This was not the 1800s.
Yes.
And so the boss said, well, I guess you're right, Roger. She shouldn't work for you. And so I go marching in. I had never worked before, actually, because I had gone to business school because I didn't want to type the weekend I graduated from college. And so, but what I did, and I was thinking about it, this became sort of a approach that I had for the rest of my life. Is I came in when it was the time of the Vietnam War. Two of the assistant and the associate product managers had just gotten into the reserves. So I was now coming in as an intern, and they were only going to be gone for 5 months. So someone said, hey, listen, this kid's coming in. She can just kind of do their stuff for 4 months. And so I was totally overwhelmed. But what I said to my boss was, I'll pretend I know how to do all this. If it's 6 o'clock every night, I can sit down with you and just ask you all the questions that occur to me over the course of the day. So I used to walk around with a yellow pad, and I would pretend that I knew how to do everything. And I'd write down all my questions, and we would have a tutorial every night from 6 o'clock at 6 o'clock. And I would ask him not just how to do things, but why certain things were happening. And this became sort of something I did, I think, my whole career, was to just sort of sit back and try to learn from everybody I was working with, to not be afraid at the end of the day to ask some questions about why something had happened. And it sort of was the path for me. And the other thing that happened, which I think was all the answer, was that I just fell in love with what I was doing and the people I was doing it with. I will say that back even at General Foods, the most exciting time over the course of the week was when the agency came. I wasn't even really exactly sure what the agency was, but everyone would get excited. They would compete to see who got to go to the agency meeting. There was a whole thing about who spoke first and second and all that. And so when I finally got to the agency side, never expecting to stay more than 2 years, I just sort of fell in love with what I was doing. It didn't feel like work. It just felt like what I wanted to do every morning. And it didn't disappoint. I mean, not that every day was spectacular, but it was just great. And so I never aspired to be CEO. I never aspired to be anything. I just wanted to do great
just
work.
Didn't want to type.
And this is the way I describe it. Every once in a while, someone would walk into my office and throw another title on my head. And I'd go, yeah, thanks a lot. Can I get back to doing my work? And one day that was, would you be CEO of Ogilvy? I'm serious. This is as simple as it was.
It's amazing. Well, I take away a few things, and I think that they're really instructive. Number one, I had a shared naivete too. I didn't know, like you're saying, I didn't, I think, and what's instructive about that is you have daughters, I have daughters, you have grandchildren, granddaughters. We have to ensure that we're not putting so many ideas in our children's heads of what they can and can't do. I had no concept that there was something I couldn't do. It's just like, oh, I'll give that a try, right? And you have the same thing. You're like, okay, I'll go get my MBA. That sounds good. I can be with the person I'm in love with. I mean, so I think that just that principle is important. The next thing you said that I think I share completely is you don't have to know everything. And I think one of the most powerful things to be able to do is say, I don't know, but I will put in the time to figure it out. It is an unleashing thought. And I think too often we go into situations and we sort of put up this front, like, I have no idea what they're talking about, but I'm going to nod and smile like I do. And I think it's a really important thing, especially in business today, to go, if you take time to educate me, I'm a smart enough person and I'll understand that. But off the cuff, I don't know. But we're going to get there together. We're going to learn together. And again, you sort of illustrated that through, I'll put in the time every night and learn. If you teach me, I will learn. And I think, again, another powerful lesson. And then the third thing I take away from that is do something you love. And here I'm going to say it publicly. I always say, I don't say it publicly, but half the time I'd show up without the paycheck because I love what I do. The other half I wouldn't, but the half the time. So I think it's really important to love what you do. And obviously you're illustrative of loving what you do. So amazing, amazing stories. Can you talk about how you see the role of mentors and sponsors? It gets talked about a lot, to women. You should find some mentors, you should find some sponsors. How important are those? Where have you seen it work? What does it look like? Can you put some more meat on that bone a bit?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Wendy. It's something I think about a lot. First of all, I think there's a huge difference between mentors and sponsors. I mean, sponsors sort of have some skin in the game. They've sort of committed to accelerating somebody's career. It's just, I don't, to me, I mean, this is going to be controversial, but I think there's an inverse relationship between organizations that have elaborate mentorship programs and the opportunities for women in those. It's usually because there's not a lot of opportunities, so they put in an even bigger mentorship program. That's been my experience. And I think that it almost absolves everyone from day-to-day learning, from just sort of looking to people around you to get enlightenment. And so I think it's a false prop for what should be your daily, sort of learning experience. And people say, who is your mentor? I had hundreds of them, not because I ever went and asked someone, will you be my mentor? Right. But I have hundreds of them because I just got into relationships, especially with my, with the senior clients I learned from some of the great CEOs. And it's amazing how if you just stop someone in the hall and say, I was fascinated by the fact that you went in that direction or whatever, they'll talk for 5 minutes. If you say, will you be my mentor and meet with me once a week? You're not going to get the CEO of IBM to do that. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So I think you have to look at everybody you work with as your mentors, as potential mentors, not in the big M sense, but the small M sense. Having said that, I also think having a sponsor is really important, because in so many of these meetings where people are discussing who should be put in what role, there's an opening, and you want someone at that table who really believes that you have potential and that you should be given the chance. And, Wendy, as you said before, nobody's perfectly ready for any job. So you've got to have someone at the table who believes that you can do it. Mm-hmm. And that person has to challenge the people at the table and say, well, I don't think she's quite ready, but I think, she would do a brilliant job. And if we challenge her that way, she will come to full flower, in that job. And so I think that actually is really important, and I think it does make a difference.
So, amazing points. I totally, taking your point. Mentorship cannot be contrived. You can't, and that's where I think sometimes some of these programs feel contrived. They feel a bit overwrought, and when that relationship's not natural, it tends to not be fruitful. So I think seeing the mentoring moments in everything you do, I totally agree. And I love the way you describe having hundreds of mentors. I do too. People always say, who are your mentors? And I think, how long you got? So totally agreed on that. Sponsorship, I totally agree too. There's two components I want to take away from that. One, I'll tell a small story. In one of those sort of succession planning meetings where I was sponsoring people, in a leadership fashion, what we had to call the room out on was that the word risk somehow seemed to be associated with the women, because there weren't very many women. So we were talking about general management or senior leadership. And because we did, again, as we've been on this journey, we don't have enough there. So you could hear the language was, I think we should take the risk on her. And I'm thinking, I had to call it out. I'm like, excuse me? It's a risk on her, but it's a sure bet on him. I mean, we have to watch our language in these moments. And it wasn't, of course, intentional, But because that the reference point isn't there a lot of times, somehow the gender had become a risk in people's minds. And it was like, no. So we, again, I think it's really important to look at that sort of institutionalized language a lot and call ourselves out and make sure that we're thinking equally about, we're always going to back someone and bet on someone coming into a role. They haven't done the role before. So, by definition, you got to back them. Yeah. And you got to make them successful. The piece yeah, please.
I want to tell one other story, because you just remind me, and you talk about getting down to business, is for years, I'm going to call out Deloitte, and actually think they have recently, done a wonderful job of getting women into leadership. But this was many years ago. They had something called the Women's Initiative, because the aspiration was there, but the reality was far from it. And there was an advisory board, and we'd get together. It was a group of women, and Sally Ride was the chair of it for a while. And we'd get together and basically yell at them. I don't know. I think it made them feel better if there were women yelling at them, because there were no women really in leadership. Anyway, I was asked to come they had an international partners meeting. I think there were like 2,000 people in Las Vegas from around the world. And I was asked to stand up and describe this women's initiative and all that. And so I had this prepared speech and all that. And I stood in front of the room, though, and it just struck me as I was looking at this room of mostly men. And I said, I could, do these slides and talk to you about this program. But here's the thing. If each of you, there are 2,000 of you, if each of you just committed to moving 2 women, you choose the time period, 2 years, 5 years, God knows we've waited this long, and just did it. Just say, these are the 2 women who I am going to see as partners in 3 years. I wouldn't have to show any slides.
Right.
You would now have 4,000 women partners. And then I sat down, and there was stunned silence in the room. It was just, and then they just kind of went on with it. But still, it just, again, the reality is, let's stop talking about this and just do it. And so I think that I do think it's starting to happen. So
well, I think we're going to come on to, in the next sort of section, as we come into agency culture, we're going to talk about quotas, and I think that's an interesting, and certainly, well, I'll save it because I want one more question on the female candidates. And I'm sorry, my team will know I come through the camera when I get really evangelical about something. So if you feel like I'm coming at you, I'm sorry. You, on sponsorship, you said the sponsors are there saying, I believe they can do this, and they're sponsoring. Let's go to the flip side of this, because this is a place where women more than men tend to be challenging in these moments. They don't believe they can do it. And I'm sure you've had this, I've had this in my career. You approach an equally ready and talented man and woman, and you say, I want you to do this job. There's a huge opportunity. Step in, step up. And the woman says, I've got a few more I's to dot and T's to cross. You always hear this, I'm not quite finished with what I came to do in this role. And the man says, put me in, I'll figure it out. I'll build the wings on the way down, right? There's no hesitation. There's no I's to dot, T's to cross. How do we, and the thing I'd say over and over to women, if someone believes in you, match their belief in you. You have to match the belief that you're being given. How do we get past that? And it's imposter syndrome. There's a lot tied to that. Where have you seen that be successful?
So, usually by the time they ask you to do a big job, it's because someone else has either left or failed, so there's usually some difficulty involved. It's usually the bigger the opportunity, the more fraught the position probably is. And so the question is fear a good thing or a bad thing? I've thought about this a lot, and I have concluded that for 75% of my career, I've been afraid in one way or another. It's, I remember sort of being made the chief operating officer of Ogilvy, which was then sort of a global job, and going to London for the first time and meeting the CEOs of our clients in London, who, you know, sort of, they were very British, and they were very scary. And I can't to this day walk down a hall of the Savoy Hotel without calling up how I felt and that first set of meetings with these clients. But I've come to realize that when you're fearful, it's because you're learning something brand new. It's actually a good thing. It means you're being challenged beyond what you thought you could do. And you just have to know that that's a positive thing, not a negative thing. That means you're really growing. And so I think a lot of what women do when they say, I don't feel I'm ready, it's because they're afraid. And so you go, great, I'm feeling, this is really hard to do. But you get to the point where the fear stuff starts feeling like the impetus to say yes. I always say, just say yes. Yes. Just when someone comes in and gives you a big, you know, opportunity and it feels scary and you don't know if you can do it, say, as Wendy, as you said, just say yes and then figure it out, because you will figure it out. If others believe this is something you can do, that means you can do it. And so just step, even though your knees are shaking, just step right in there and do it. It's really, I have a book that moved me profoundly. It was the Kay Graham autobiography. I actually recommend it to everybody, because if you ever met Kay Graham, there was no one who appeared more confident, warm, in control. You read this book and she actually says, my knees were shaking every time I went into a meeting for the first 2 years that I took over the Washington Post. Yeah. And I can call that up in my own head in various moments and just think about Kay Graham looking, you know, you look like a swan on top, but you're pedaling like a duck underneath. Just see Kay Graham sitting at the head of that table with her knees shaking, and know that's part of the game. And you just sort of reinterpret what you might think of as fear as just the early learning onto great leadership.
Well, I think that unlock of repositioning fear to meaning that you're learning, I think is a huge unlock. I think that's super valuable. So, and look, we talk about the imposter syndrome a lot. It's real for women. That voice, I tell, you know, the women in our organization all the time, I still have that voice. She's still in there. I mean, the benefit of age is you get better control of the voice, but I mean, you know, perhaps a little bit, I always say you just got to shut that bitch up sometimes. You know, you just got to get control of her and be like, no, we're doing this.
Here's the other thing that's happened to me, though, too, is the imposter syndrome has broadened for me, because now that I've been in all these boardrooms, remember when you were young, people go, oh, it's going to the board. So now you're in the boardroom and you're looking at all these people who are just like plain people trying to do a good job. And you realize that these people who were sort of on the hill, who you idolized, they're also just human beings trying to make good decisions and apply judgment. And, you know, so you realize that in one sense, we're all imposters, because we're all just sort of trying to do a good job. And then you relax, you know, you sort of say, they're not gods. They're just like regular people, and they need help. And, you know, and you can have good discussions and you just breathe out. Breathe out. It's all fine.
That's great. That's great. All right. So we're going to go on to now let's talk about our agencies, the cultures in our agencies, the conditions that have to exist to be successful. What are some of the steps that you think we should take as we think about, you know, actions or initiatives that either you've implemented, Ogilvy's implemented, or you've seen, or, let's get specific. What things have you seen that have sort of unlocked this ability for women to come into these leadership roles?
Well, I think, one of it's got a name now that the coaches use, but, if I knew sports better, I would know what it was. But the most dramatic transformation in terms of gender equity that I ever saw was at Avon. And I want to say it was 20 years ago that the whole leadership of the company was male. And yet it was the whole sales force was female, all the customers were female, and a CEO, his name was Hicks Waldron, came into Avon and said, "This is crazy. This makes absolutely no sense. We're going to fix this." And what he said to all his direct reports was, I want to see who you hire right underneath you. I want you to come to me with a list of people, and I want at least one female candidate for every job. And if you can't get there, because we're not going to compromise quality, if you can't get there, then you give me the plan for how this is never going to happen again, so that you're gonna fix the pipeline and you're gonna fix the selection choices. And I think it took 2 years. It only took 2 years, and the whole leadership of Avon was female. Yeah. So it's kind of like, how bad do you want it and how fast? And so I had a similar situation, I have to say, at Ogilvy, where we made a commitment to get more women into senior leadership. And somebody came to me with a list of candidates for a job, a big job. And there were 3 wonderfully qualified women and 1 man. And I said, "Why is the man on the list?" Because if we're serious and we have 3 remarkable women, and if we all believe that the agency will be a better place if there are more women in leadership, why is there a man? Why is the man not? He was great. I loved him. Yes. And the answer was, well, it wouldn't be fair. And so now you go back and go, okay, well, what's fair? What we've decided is what would be better for the entire organization is if there were more women in the organization. Mm-hmm. So I don't like the fact that you're not thinking that way. That doesn't, is it fair? I'm not sure that's the right question. Right. And so I think we're at a moment, though, where there's so much talent. There are so many talented women, so many experienced, talented women who can run agencies, that I think it's the moment to say, are we serious about it or not? And again, never compromise quality. Then, now we're in a different place. Now it's just, sort of a quota system or something. Right. But we don't have to. And so, and that also doesn't mean that every promotion, everything has to be a woman. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that we are committed to more gender equality in our leadership. I have to say, and again, this might be a little controversial, I was in a meeting, a situation recently where a white man was basically apologizing for the fact that he got a big job because he's a white man. And I just thought, no. That is evidence that we are going too far in what we're trying to do. The mission is good. The mission is right. We all benefit from it, but let's not overcorrect so that we're in a place where you have to apologize for your gender and your ethnicity.
Right. So, a couple of building points on what you were saying. Number one, on the empathy that is required here. So when someone says to me, well, that's not fair, or that doesn't, and the empathy you have to do in that moment is say, okay, well, let's look at the composition of our team here. We have X amount of, one race, X amount of one gender. Let's flip that the opposite way. So where we have a largely male and Caucasian leadership team, and you're potentially one of them, and you feel that's not fair, to use your language, let's flip it and say that you were the minority in the team. This was a composition of all African-American women. Now, does that feel fair to you, that you would be the person who didn't have any connection, background to that person? Does that feel fair? Because I think we just take our starting point. We say, well, our starting point is fair, and then we have to keep our actions fair. And I go, no, the starting point is completely backwards and broken. We're not starting from a place of success. We can call that place of success once we do this hard work. And always, I want to be so quick to bring into this conversation. This is about unleashing and unlocking the potential and the growth of our companies. If we are only recruiting through this narrow spectrum of people into our organizations, the vast quantity of talent in a time of a talent war, let's be honest, to get the best and the brightest. And our culture says, no, we're right for this type of person, but not all of these people. I mean, the talent that we're foregoing in our business and the difficulty we're strapping our businesses with because we don't have all the talent is madness. So I feel, this word of fair to me is like, we got to get to a fair starting point, and then we can talk about fair, number one. Number two, to your point, I'll offer what we did at Coca-Cola when I was there. We were leading the Women's Leadership Council. To your point, Muhtar Kent did exactly the same thing that you were outlining. He gave each leader of each region the requirement to have one woman as a business unit president in the next 18 months. And guess what? It was so, right? Just what you did in that Las Vegas meeting. Like, I can give you your strategy and it's on one page. Here it is. And I think, further to your point now, we are in a time where I'm sure that you lived through periods, Shelly, where there wasn't a pipeline of talent. There weren't enough people who had their MBAs, for instance. That just simply is not the case anymore. There are more women coming out of MBA programs than men now. That is not an acceptable, that you couldn't find the talent, just not even based in reality. So, coming on to sort of more conditions of success, we did say we're going to touch on quotas. I know you sit on several boards, GE, Merck. Is this a discussion that you think is being had at big companies? Should we be thinking about it at agencies?
I find it a sort of ham-fisted, unnecessary way to get at what we're trying to get to. Now, having said that, I will say I was on a panel a number of years ago. I think it was either Norway or Sweden, but I think it was Norway. It was the first country to put in quotas, and actually they said 40% of any board has to be female. That was the quota. And there was a woman from Norway who was on this panel, and she said when she first heard it, she was horrified by it. She thought, it's demeaning to women, and the suggestion sort of that the only reason any women would be on a board would be because they're meeting these quotas. So she said, it's terrible. Now, having lived through it, she said, the truth is when you have a gun to your head, it was amazing the talent they discovered. She said, all of a sudden, these incredible women who no one had ever heard of before or seen were coming forward and joining boards. So I think to the extent that it kind of makes people look more broadly at the talent that's available, it's a good thing. But I think putting in numbers and insisting that at a given moment in time that everybody have the same sort of gender mix and everything, I just think it's unnecessary to go there. I think if there's pressure that the market can apply that you don't have to do through government regulation, and I think you're feeling it right now. I mean, I think the market is before we have any quotas or regulations. I mean, I having sitting in these board meetings, there is pressure to make sure that there is a good mix at the board. And the other thing, Wendy, to your point of is talent available? I'm just going on a board of a company that's being spun off from Merck whose core is women's health. And so when you're starting from the ground with nobody at the table in the year 2021, the female talent that we have uncovered to join this board is amazing. I mean, you just go, I don't know how to pick.
Right.
There's so many fabulous people. Helene Gale, by the way, is going on this board. She's on the Coca-Cola board, but
yes, that's great.
yeah. So it's still the talents there.
And further to that, you can, in situations where you're using recruiters, we have given briefs to recruiters that say, only bring us people from underrepresented groups. Don't even say, it's like your example from Ogilvy where you said, and you know what, everyone works a little harder and voila, you have this incredibly talented embarrassment of riches from which to select from. So, we do not have pipeline problems anymore. But speaking of pipeline, I mean, for the most part, agencies typically have, in my experience, high representation of women in the entry ranks and to the mid-level. We typically run around 60% or more female to male in the entry level to mid-level, but something happens in the conversion from mid to senior. And have you seen ways to address specifically, get after that sort of enduring challenge? What has worked in your experience there?
Well, again, I think what was worrying me the most was that you got some wonderfully talented women who were successful. It wasn't after the first child; it was after the second child that they would come in and say, "I can't really do this. It's too much." Let's be honest. The burden of childcare and almost always disproportionately falls on women. And so they're trying to juggle 100 things at once. And at a certain point, it just gets to be too hard. So to me, a good part of the answer is, what can we do to make it easier? So, I'm going to be fascinated to see how the ability to work more from home impacts it. On the one hand, the fact that kids aren't in person school, I think, is a big problem for women who are working. But on the other hand, if they go back to school and you can work from home more, I'm a bit optimistic that could work for women. And so, and I also think you have to sort of think about, are there things you can do to get them through the period that's challenging? Of course, the whole thing goes back to what we talked about at the start, which is, if you love what you're doing, you're much more likely to keep doing it. And if you don't like what you're doing, at the slightest provocation, you go, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to go home. But if you really love it, one of the things I've found is that you can fit into your life everything you love. That is the truth, is sort of, so it's the stuff that's unrewarding, boring, unfulfilling, dull, and that's the stuff that you need to get rid of. Now, with any luck, that's not your job. So you're not finding those things about your job. So the more you love it, the more you're going to work to be able to do it and also do everything else. I also think the fact that there are more women in senior management actually helps more than anything, because if you know that there's more opportunity, you're going to be much more likely to stay. If you're in a situation where you go, okay, I'm going to keep working and working and working and finding it difficult, and I'm never really going to get to the senior levels of leadership, then, why bother in the first place? So I think there's so many good things to be said for more women in senior leadership. One of them being that it makes it more probable that you will get to the highest level of leadership, and therefore there's nothing more motivating, I think.
I agree. Sheryl Sandberg says you can't be what you can't see, and I think it's so important as we think just broadly about underrepresented groups. We have to make sure that our people can see a path. We've been doing a series of internal conversations, and I had the delightful opportunity to have a conversation with a young media planner in our Ghana office. And she interviewed me, and I gave her so much credit. She said to me, Wendy, when will there be someone on your leadership team who looks like me? And it is a deep seated accountability. I feel that young woman who is working her tail off on our business knows that with her hard work and with her investment in us and our investment in her, that she can come to whatever level that she wants. Again, we have a job to do to make sure that everyone can see what they want to be, however far that they want to go. And to your point on the, the work from home and the blend, I do think as we think about returning to work, goodness, as vaccines go out around the world now, we don't foresee a time where 100% of our workforce will ever be back in the office at one time. I think our ways of working are, permanently changed now. And to your point, for some people, that's a good thing. For other people, if they've got kids at home or, an environment where they can't focus, they're desperate to come back to the office, but they will decide. It won't be the company. I mean, there'll be some roles, of course, that require technical equipment or capability where that would be the case, where they have to be in an environment. And certainly as you think about, our clients with factories and that sort of thing. But I think for the most part, the workforce moving forward are going to be able to determine the work approach in terms of location, place, even time, that works for them. And I think that's an extraordinary opportunity that we can, really now start to shape how we work. I think it's going to be a great change. All right, I'm conscious of time. I want to come into just one or two questions about the industry, and then we're going to flip to the questions in the Q&A. So if you've got questions, please line them up. But in the industry, Shelly, I mean, you've been such a champion for the industry. I'm sure there are many people who watched your career and went, that's the industry for me. But how do we make sure that this next generation of female leaders do look at this industry and think it's for them? What do you think some of the outward messages we have to send to the young people in ad school or in MBA class look and say, yeah, that's a place I can build my career? What can we do better?
Well, I think to me, it's shining a light on what's obvious and what's happening. I mean, for anyone who is involved at all in any kind of movement or social mission or whatever, you can't do it without communications. I mean, I don't know, Wendy, I'm involved now in sort of dealing with people who don't want to get vaccinated. I mean, it all comes down to what's the messaging going to be? Who's calling the ad people? They know how to do this. And so I think just making sure that people understand that what we do is so important. It goes so far beyond selling shampoo, or soda. It's the ability to communicate about everything. So I think the first thing is just sort of reminding people that what we do makes a difference to the world, and it's hard for the world to achieve what they want to achieve without communicating with people. So that's the first thing. I think that the second thing, again, is to the extent that we get more and more diverse people leading the industry and leading agencies, I think it becomes easier to recruit people in. And I think earlier on, advertising is a bit of a mystery, I think, to young people. They know what engineers do. They know what pilots do. They know what, scientists do, pharmacists. It's just, I think we got to start educating younger people about what it is that we do. That, I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't even know you could have a career in advertising or marketing unless you were unless you could write or draw. That was a revelation to me when I was in my 20s. Yeah. So I think just sort of getting just informing kids early on that this is a great way to spend a career and a life is important. I was thinking as I was saying it that, we had the people who were larger than life, David Ogilvy, Bill Bernbach, that I don't know that we have those people so much anymore. And we ought to think about how to make them part of something bigger than just the advertising industry, just, sort of giants in and of themselves who are fascinating. I think Mad Men helps, Wendy. I don't know if we lost Mad Men, but I think for a while, given the popularity of that show, that was a huge help for everybody.
Yes. Yeah. Although, albeit some of the behaviors we wanted to leave behind. I'm not sure if you've got a bottle of scotch in your office. I don't. But yeah, and perhaps a few other things. But yeah, no, it did. It unpacked it. I always used to say, I mean, as far as my kids were concerned, when I worked at Coke, I was on the factory line making the Coke, and I thought that was fine. That's what they thought I did. So, Shelly, last question. I'm going to come to the chat. What would your message be to the people like me, to the people who are actively leading, the companies and the organizations, the agencies now? What simplistically, in order to drive equal gender representation by 2025, what would you say? Go do this.
Well, I would just again say, what I'd say, Wendy, is go do this. Let's stop talking about it. I'm back to Las Vegas. Let's stop talking about it. I will say I was really very, a little surprised and very happy. This morning, Mark Reed sent out a note saying that, sort of an overview on 2020. 40% of the leadership of WPP right now is female. 40% of the senior leadership, 51% of the employees, 40% of the senior leadership. That is a huge step forward from where it was. And I just think once you get the ball rolling, you have momentum. It's easier and easier. It's amazing what happens when you have a female CEO. We watch this in whether it's General Motors or Deloitte, or all of a sudden, all these women start appearing everywhere. Not because, and I would argue, not because a woman CEO wants to put more women in leadership. It's because it removes all the obstacles. She tends not to see the risk of putting women in as CFO or GC or whatever it is. And so I think we're on a roll, frankly, but we have to ride it. Just ride. It's happening. Just more and more and more.
Great. Okay. So I'm looking at the chat here. I'm gonna try and do some rapid fire questions here. How do we encourage people to step up and sponsor others? So on the flip side, we talked about being the recipient of the sponsorship and the mentor, but how do we get people to get into that sponsoring of others and give them the ability to sort of successfully champion other people? How do we encourage that? What does that look like?
Well, I think that's the role of the leader, frankly. It's when the leader tells the people in senior management, here's what I want to achieve this year. You would hope to see that one of those things is more gender, general diverse representation. And so it's only when the boss, frankly, I think, says, this is a priority, I will judge you based on your ability to get this done, that it will get done.
Yeah, tone from the top makes a lot of difference, right?
Absolutely, and it's got to be the CEO.
It does. I agree. I mean, I often say I am the chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, because if it doesn't start with me, our people aren't going to be empowered. So totally agree. What advice or thoughts would you give for women who are 40 plus in an industry that is seeing a great amount of younger talent, is the question?
Well, I mean, if you look at the leaders, female leaders in the industry now, they are 40 plus. So I would not be discouraged by that. I would take that as sort of a motivational observation. It takes a little bit of time. I mean, it's kind of to get to a leadership position, and so you just kind of hang in there, and good things should happen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's been sort of a lot of discussion about the young talent in our business, but I mean, I think I find that to be sort of that reverse mentoring opportunity. You know, the more time you spend with younger talent, the more I'm getting, you know, that perspective washed over me. And I hope in reverse, they're getting my perspective washed over them. So I think, you know, again, it does take all of us. The age is one of the piece parts of our representation as we think about diversity and inclusion. And so we think about not just gender or race or culture or background, but sexuality and age and ability. I mean, we have to have a socioeconomic background. I mean, we have to have this broad spectrum, and it will take all of us to lead the company and create results accordingly. Shelly, what advice would you give your younger self, and would you do anything differently if you would do it all over again? Would you type, I think, is at the heart of that.
Yeah, I've just had the most remarkable career, completely unexpected. And I would, the only thing I would have said is, you know, I would have started earlier, but I started as soon as I could. I just didn't know that I was entering a career for life. But no, I've had a ball. I mean, I couldn't have had a more wonderful career. And what matters to me is, you know, all the people who I'm still close to, all the clients I'm still close to. I was even thinking this morning, I've exchanged emails with 3 former clients of mine who are doing different things. It's just, you know, hold on to each relationship. It's for life. It has the potential to be for life. And when you get to my age and you look back and you go, God, I love these people. You know, I would do it all over again if I could do it with them. You know, it's the people that matter in the end. And, you know, just sort of, more people, I don't even need anymore. It's just, I do it with the same people all over again.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that goes back to sort of the fundamental of just the golden rule. I think, Shelly, you are just, you know, exhibit A of treating people the way you want to be treated. Obviously, and I started the podcast by this sort of outpouring of adoration and love for you, but that's not just because you happen to be you. It's the way you have treated people and the way you have invested in those relationships and the difference you have made in those people's lives is why people feel that way. So I think it's just it's a you know, remarkable reminder that very thing we learn in grade school, just to treat people the way we'd like to be treated, can, you know, become the root of a successful career. So incredible. Okay, last question. And it's so hard to pick. Okay, how do we inspire men leaders to see the value in talented mid-level women and put in the effort to retain and grow them in their career? So essentially, what role do men play in this?
Men play a critical role. I mean, it's just sort of, you know, we're not going to do this alone. We're going to do it all together. And I think getting the initial commitment, I think, is important, that this company will be better if we have more gender equality, we have more diversity. Is just, and you have to get men to, you know, everyone has to buy in. And if you don't buy in, don't stay. But there's got to be a general belief that the world will be a better place if there were more, you know, equal representation of everybody. And then you have to hold everybody to it, men and women. I mean, you know, there are some men who are such deep and active believers in women that you want to kiss them at a meeting. I mean, you know, they couldn't believe more. By the way, they tend to be fathers of daughters. Yeah. And you just know that even if you weren't there egging them on, they would get there by themselves. And so it's just putting together a coalition of the willing, sort of, that men who were believers and women who are also believers and who know how much talent is there. And then you have, you know, Eden.
Yes, I think it is back to the core of what we see in leadership now, right? Empathy, and building that empathy. You know, I think it's profoundly impacting. Every man has a mother. Many have sisters. Many have daughters. You know, many have important women in their lives, some way, somehow, partners, wives, etc. You know, reminding that sort of empathy of what you would want for your child or for your mother, sister, spouse. That's what we're doing here. It's an incredibly personal thing as well as professional. And I think the more we can kind of connect those two, I think it can be extraordinary. Well, we are fully out of time. It's been remarkable. I know I can speak on behalf of everyone who's joined us today. Shelly, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done that has allowed those of us who have followed you to follow in the trail you already created. And you truly created it almost singularly. So thank you for that. And thank you for spending the time with us today. I look forward to doing it again. And thanks for everyone joining us. Have a great day.